There is a very specific feeling you get when you sit down, blow the dust off the cover, and open up a really old photograph album.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you flip past that heavy, worn binding, and suddenly you are looking at faces from decades ago. And it is a beautiful experience. I mean, you see people you love.
Right. Or maybe you see people you have never even met, but whose features somehow mirror your own.
Yes, that is it. You recognize your grandfather's jawline on a man wearing a World War I uniform.
It is uncanny when that happens.
It really is. But right alongside that beauty, there is always this sharp, almost physical sting of nostalgia and loss.
Because you realize what is gone.
Spot on. You see the old house that was sold 20 years ago. You see the grandparents who are no longer sitting in their favorite armchairs.
You see your own parents looking so incredibly young, holding you as a toddler.
Yeah, and the overwhelming realization washes over you as you close the book. Absolutely nothing stays the same. The people change, the places change, the seasons pass.
It is a heavy thing to process. It really is. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are taking a deep dive into why that specific sting of nostalgia is actually a massive clue about human design.
It points to something much bigger than just missing the good old days.
Right. We are looking at a classic piece of writing from the 19th century English bishop, J.C. Ryle. We are going to unpack a chapter titled Our Home from his well-known work, Practical Religion.
Which is a fantastic text to look into.
It is. The mission for our conversation right now is to look at the universal human longing for a permanent dwelling place. We want to see how the physical world constantly frustrates that desire, and how Christian theology presents Christ as the single lasting sanctuary for the soul. It is a subject that resonates with everyone. Regardless of your background, that longing for permanence is, well, it's hardwired into the human condition.
It really seems to be.
And what makes J.C. Ryle's writing so compelling is his absolute refusal to sugarcoat reality. He is remarkably straightforward.
He does not hold back at all.
No, he writes with an unvarnished honesty that cuts right through the polite illusions we build around ourselves to cope with getting older.
And we all build those illusions, don't we?
We do. We have to, in a way. Yet, at the same time, his writing is intensely pastoral. He's not trying to depress you.
Right. That is a key distinction.
He is trying to wake you up to reality so you can find actual, unshakable comfort. The text brings out startling truths about the fleeting nature of life, and he frames this entire discussion through the lens of Psalm 90.
Let's start right there with Psalm 90 because context is everything. Ryle opens his chapter by zeroing in on the very first verse.
Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generation.
Yeah. Now, if you just hear that in isolation, it sounds like a lovely, comforting piece of poetry.
It sounds like something you would see cross-stitched on a pillow in a guest bedroom.
Spot on, a nice little sentiment. But Ryle points out the specific historical context here, and it is staggering. Moses wrote this psalm.
And he did not write it while sitting comfortably in a palace in Egypt.
No, he did not. He wrote it after spending 40 years watching an entire generation of Israelites, the very people who left Egypt with him, die in the wilderness.
The historical reality completely alters the weight of that verse. If we connect this to the bigger picture of the Exodus narrative, we are looking at a massive population.
A staggering number of people.
Right. Hundreds of thousands of people crossed the Red Sea in absolute triumph. They were delivered from slavery. They saw miracles that defied explanation, and they were headed to the Promised Land.
But then they reached Kadesh Barnea.
Yeah, they hit a turning point. They stood on the very edge of the land they were promised, but they let their fear overrule their faith.
They panicked when they saw the giants in the land.
Because of their unbelief and rebellion, God pronounced a judgment. That specific generation would not enter the land.
Such a heavy consequence.
They would wander in the wilderness for 40 years until every single person 20 years old and upward had passed away.
Right.
So Moses is functioning as the leader, the pastor, and essentially the undertaker for an entire nation.
Just pause and think about the sheer scale of what Moses witnessed. Over 4 decades, he is watching his friends drop like grass.
It is hard to even picture.
The strong, the swift, the wise, the tender, the beautiful companions who walked through the parted waters with him, day after day, month after month, year after year.
The visual of that is just relentless.
If you do the math on a population that size dying off over 40 years, there must have been dozens of funerals every single day.
Literally every day.
The desert literally became a massive wandering graveyard.
The psychological and spiritual burden on Moses would have been crushing. He is watching the continuous, daily fulfillment of a divine judgment.
He can never escape it.
His companions are constantly changing, consuming, and passing away into the sand. The wilderness was never meant to be their home, but it became their tomb.
That is a harsh reality.
And it is in the middle of that environment, an environment defined by wandering, death, and the temporary nature of canvas tents, that Moses looks up and says, "Lord, thou art our dwelling place."
He had nothing else to look to.
He recognizes that because they are pilgrims and strangers upon the earth, with no abiding city, God himself must be their home.
That is a stunning picture. And Ryle brings this ancient reality right into his own modern context by pointing to the Church of England's burial service.
The liturgy there is incredibly striking.
He notes how beautiful the liturgy is, specifically the imagery of the minister meeting the coffin at the churchyard gate. The minister leads the mourners into the church, and as they walk, what do they read?
They read Psalm 90.
Yeah, they read Psalm 90.
Ryle notes that he knows nothing which sounds so soothing, solemnizing, heart-touching, and moving to a person's spirit at that trying moment as the utterance of the old inspired lawgiver.
Because it just cuts through everything else.
When you are standing near an open grave, all the illusions of earthly permanence are violently stripped away.
You cannot pretend anymore.
The words, "Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place," become an anchor in a moment when the ground literally feels like it is shifting beneath your feet.
It is a solemn recognition that your truest home is not the physical body that is being laid in the earth.
Right.
I have to ask you a question about human nature here. Why does it so often take a brush with mortality or literally standing at a churchyard gate for human beings to recognize that they are just pilgrims and strangers on the earth?
That is the big question, isn't it?
Why are we so incredibly prone to suppressing this reality?
We have a remarkable capacity for distraction, mostly as a defense mechanism. The daily routines of life, the acquisition of possessions, the building of careers, all these things create a very convincing illusion of permanence.
We act like we are going to be here forever.
We act as if the current arrangement will last forever because dealing with the fragility of life requires an emotional toll we prefer to avoid.
It is just too exhausting to think about all the time.
If you constantly walked around thinking about how fragile your body is, you would be paralyzed by anxiety. So we build walls.
But then death intrudes.
Yes. When death intrudes, it shatters that defense. The illusion breaks. You are forced to see the reality that human life is incredibly brief.
There is no hiding from it at that point.
And because of that fragility, you are compelled to take a hard, realistic look at this physical world you spend so much energy trying to turn into a permanent paradise.
If the physical world is compromised by that fragility, we need to take an honest inventory of the place we're trying to live in. Ryle says the world is beautiful. He brings up the sunsets, the oceans, the harvests, the massive forests.
It is not that the physical world is inherently bad or ugly.
Right. But he argues it is not a true home. It is an inn.
Just the place you stop for the night.
Exactly. Well, I mean, spot on. It is a tent, a tabernacle, a lodging, a training school. But it is not a permanent residence. And he proves this by breaking down 4 specific fractures in our earthly home.
This is where his pastoral realism shines. He systematically dismantles the idea that the world can offer lasting security, starting with the fact that it is a changing world.
That is the first fracture. A changing world. Everything is constantly moving. Families, properties, landlords, tenants, laborers.
The churn is just endless.
Ryle points out how incredibly uncommon it is to find the same family name in the exact same dwelling for 3 generations running. It is the exception, not the rule.
People pack up, they move for work.
They downsize when the kids leave, they upgrade when they get a promotion. The scenery is always shifting. The concept of a forever home is basically a marketing myth.
And that constant movement prevents us from laying down the kind of eternal roots our souls actually crave. We are constantly pulling up the stakes of our tent.
We never really settle.
But the second fracture he points out goes beyond just moving boxes. He says it is a trying and disappointing world.
This one hits hard.
He makes a very sharp observation. He asks whoever lives to be 50 years old and does not find to his cost that this is true.
By 50, you have seen some things.
By the time a person reaches half a century, they have encountered what Ryle calls the skeleton in the closet.
I love that phrase, the skeleton in the closet. Because from the outside, especially today with curated social media feeds, a family might look flawless.
Oh, the pictures are always perfect.
The house is painted, the lawn is manicured, the vacation photos are stunning. But behind the front door, there are massive trials.
Everyone is dealing with something.
Ryle lists them out. Trials in marriage, trials in singleness, trials with children breaking your heart, trials in money matters, trials in health.
The sheer volume of these trials is staggering.
And as he notes, maybe not even a tenth of them ever come to light. People carry these burdens silently to work, to the grocery store, and to church.
They do. We are surrounded by walking wounded. And this ties directly into his third fracture, which is perhaps the most sobering. It is a dying world.
Death meets us at every turn.
Ryle uses the poignant imagery of Christmas gatherings. As families come together year after year, eventually there are empty chairs.
That is such a vivid picture.
There are vacant places at the table where a grandfather used to sit and carve the turkey.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second. When you read that part of the text, he asks these rapid-fire questions. Where are our fathers and mothers? Where are the old teachers? Where are the friends we played with at school?
And the reply he gives is brutal.
He says, dead, dead, dead. The daisies are growing over their graves, and we are left alone. Isn't he just being incredibly morbid?
It sounds like it at first glance.
Focusing on empty chairs at Christmas sounds like a recipe for depression. How is this actually helpful for practical religion?
It feels morbid to modern ears because we have sanitized death. We put it in hospitals and funeral homes and try not to look at it.
We push it as far out of sight as possible.
But Ryle is not being morbid. He is being realistic. Ignoring the empty chair is lying to yourself.
You cannot just pretend they're still there.
If you pretend the world is not dying, you will put all your hope in a system that is guaranteed to collapse. By facing the reality of death head-on, he is stripping away your false hopes so you can rebuild your foundation on something that actually survives the grave.
It is painful surgery.
It is painful surgery, but it is necessary to cure the disease of false hope.
I see what you mean. The realism is the medicine. And the final fracture he identifies proves just how deep the disease goes. He says it is a dividing world.
Families do not just break apart through death.
No, they fracture through discord. He notes how rarely families stay united after the surviving parent is laid in the grave. The cement is withdrawn, the principle of cohesion is lost.
This is where the emotional reality of sin and human weakness becomes intensely apparent.
It gets really ugly sometimes.
When the patriarch or matriarch is gone, the underlying tensions that were kept in check out of respect suddenly bubble to the surface.
Ryle talks about the squabbles that happen after a parent dies, the wretched wrangles over money or trinkets.
It's so common, it is almost a cliche.
You see siblings who grew up in the same house going to war over a piece of furniture or the remainder of a bank account. And he uses this brilliant analogy. He compares these relational breaches to a crack in china.
That visual is just perfect.
You might be able to rivet the pieces back together. You might patch up the argument so you can tolerate each other at holidays, but the crack is always there.
It is never quite cured.
Those who played in the same nursery rarely lie down in the same churchyard or keep peace with one another until they die.
If we look at these four fractures, the changing, the trying, the dying, and the dividing, we have to ask why the world operates this way.
Why is it all so broken?
The Christian worldview provides a very clear historical answer. These are the bitter fruit of sin. This is the sorrowful consequence of the fall of Adam and Eve.
It goes all the way back to the beginning.
When humanity rebelled, the original design was fractured. Thorns and thistles entered the physical ground, and relational thorns entered human interactions.
Understanding this theological origin is vital.
It means you should not murmur or fret as if some strange, unexpected thing has happened to you. This is the reality of a fallen world, and you must accept it without complaint while doing your best to lighten the sorrows of the people around you.
So, practically speaking, how does Ryle apply this sobering reality to the reader? He does not just leave it as an abstract theological concept hovering in the air.
He brings it right down to earth.
He speaks directly to three specific groups, starting with the young. If you are listening to this and you are young and your future looks bright and cheerful, Ryle's advice is incredibly practical. He says, moderate your expectations.
He is giving you a shield against bitterness. He is telling the younger reader not to place the full weight of their hope on earthly outcomes.
Because the earth cannot support that weight.
If you expect a flawless marriage, perfect children who never rebel, or a career that never frustrates you, you are setting yourself up to be crushed.
Your disappointment will destroy you.
The less you expect from people and things here below, the happier you will be. You'll be dealing with reality rather than a fantasy, which allows you to extend grace when people inevitably fail you.
Then he addresses the prosperous listeners, those who have not yet had the skeleton in their closet exposed.
The people who seem to be coasting.
Poverty, sickness, and family troubles have passed over their door so far. They might be sitting there thinking, I am good. I have a great retirement account. My health is fine. I will die quietly in my bed and see no sorrow.
Ryle's warning to them is stark.
You are not yet in harbor. A sudden storm can change your note in an instant. A single phone call from a doctor can wipe out all that security.
So do not lean your whole weight on your wealth. It is a fragile reed that will snap and pierce your hand. Hold your possessions with a loose grip.
And finally, he addresses those who currently have a happy home. He is not anti-happiness.
Not at all.
He acknowledges that a really happy Christian home is the nearest approach to heaven on earth. If you have that, you should be immensely thankful for it.
But even then, he pulls in the wisdom of the Apostle Paul from 1 Corinthians 7.
The fashion of this world passes away.
The current state of things will not last forever. Those who rejoice must do so knowing the temporary nature of the joy.
If the physical world is completely compromised by these four fractures, then we are left completely exposed. We need a shelter that isn't made of bricks and mortar or dependent on a healthy bank account.
We need something storm-proof.
How does Ryle solve this? This brings us to the core hope of his writing, the portable sanctuary of the soul.
Ryle makes a clear distinction here about timing. He acknowledges 2 Corinthians 5.1 that heaven is the final destination. The building of God, the house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens.
That is where the soul and body are eventually reunited, renewed, and perfected.
But you and I are not there yet. We are still walking through the wilderness. So what do we do right now?
We need something for today.
Ryle points out that the believer has a present spiritual dwelling place today. And that home is Christ himself.
This is a massive theological comfort. To know Christ by faith is to have an immediate, accessible sanctuary. But I want to talk about the mechanics of this. How does a person live in Christ daily?
It is easy to say that as an abstract idea, but you are right. What does it look like on a Tuesday afternoon when you are overwhelmed?
Ryle says it means fleeing to him in every storm of conscience. It means using him as your refuge in times of trouble.
He gives a list of titles that function almost like specific tools for the soul. He says we use Christ as our priest, our confessor, our absolver, and our spiritual director every single morning and evening.
Now, in a Protestant context, this is highly significant.
Very significant.
You do not have to travel to a physical building to find absolution. You do not have to sit in a booth with a human mediator to confess your anxieties or your sins.
You have a direct, unhindered line to the creator of the universe. You carry the sanctuary with you.
That concept of carrying the sanctuary is beautifully illustrated by an analogy Ryle uses. He points to the humblest of God's creatures, the snail or the tortoise, which carries its shell on its back.
It is a great image.
Wherever that creature goes, it has its home. In the same way, the Christian carries their eternal home with them everywhere they go.
You can strip a person of their health, their money, their liberty, and their friends, but you cannot separate them from the sanctuary they carry within.
It is entirely untouched by external circumstances.
To reinforce that reality, Ryle quotes the 17th century Puritan Richard Baxter. Baxter wrote these lines, "What if in prison I must dwell, may I not then converse with thee? Save me from sin, thy wrath and hell, call me thy child, and I am free."
That is the portable sanctuary in action.
You could be locked in a stone cell, completely isolated from the changing, trying world, and still be entirely at home.
Let me offer a modern analogy here to try and capture how this works. Think of this spiritual reality like a deep-sea diver's suit.
Okay, I like where this is going.
You are dropped into the ocean, the surrounding environment is freezing, it is hostile, and it is full of immense crushing pressure.
Right, the pressure of the ocean represents the trying, dying world.
Yeah.
If you were unprotected in that environment, the pressure will literally crush your lungs. It will destroy you.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. But the diving suit provides a completely separate internal atmosphere. It gives you perfect safety, warmth, and oxygen.
You are insulated from the elements.
The pressure is still out there, pressing against the glass. The darkness is still out there. But you are breathing the air of a different world.
That is a very helpful way to look at it.
How does grasping this theological reality alter how a person processes daily anxiety and sudden loss? What is the actual mechanism in the brain and the soul?
It shifts the entire foundation of a person's peace. If your peace is tied to the external environment, your bank account, your health, the stability of your family, then every time the pressure changes, you will experience severe anxiety.
You are constantly bracing for impact.
Every sudden loss will feel like a breach in your hull, and the water starts rushing in. But if your peace is anchored in this portable sanctuary, in the internal atmosphere of Christ's presence, the external environment loses its terrifying grip.
It cannot get inside.
You can acknowledge the pain and the loss without being consumed by it. You still feel the cold water around you, but you know your truest home remains entirely intact. The pressure cannot breach the suit.
That is such a vital distinction. Knowing that this portable sanctuary exists is wonderful, but we need to actually walk through the front door. We need to examine the specific architectural features of this spiritual house. What makes it so safe?
Ryle outlines 5 distinct attributes of Christ as a dwelling place, which we can think of as the 5 rooms of the true home.
The first room Ryle describes is characterized by this truth. There is room for all. The door is always on the latch.
It is never bolted no matter what time of night you arrive. This speaks directly to the sheer accessibility of Christ.
The imagery he uses here is drawn straight from the parables. The fatted calf and the best robe are always ready. And Ryle is very specific about who is welcome.
It's not just the respectable, put-together people who sit in the front pew.
He says there is room for the vilest of the vile, the servant of sin, the enemy of all righteousness.
But then he also includes the opposite end of the spectrum, the Pharisee, the Sadducee, the publican.
That specific list is brilliant because it covers every type of human failure.
The Pharisee represents the rigid, self-righteous rule follower who thinks they don't need grace.
They think they built their own sanctuary.
The Sadducee represents the skeptic, the intellectual elite who doubts the supernatural. The publican represents the corrupt traitor, the person who has sold out their own people for money.
Whether your sin is gross, public immorality, or quiet, arrogant pride, the door is unbolted for you. Come unto me, he cries.
But once a person actually steps through that door, they enter the second room, which Ryle calls boundless mercy.
And what is fascinating here is how Ryle unpacks the sequence of events that happens to a person once they are inside.
He lays out a very clear step-by-step understanding of salvation, drawing heavily from the theology of Romans 8.
He says, whom he receives, he keeps. Whom he admits, he at once fully justifies.
Whom he justifies, he sanctifies. Whom he sanctifies, he glorifies.
That sequence is often called the golden chain of redemption. It is a massive theological framework packed into a few sentences.
And we need to define what justification actually means here, because it directly counters performance-based religion.
It is not God saying, you are a pretty good person, I will overlook your flaws.
It is a legal declaration. It means the perfect righteousness of Christ is credited to your account. You are declared entirely faultless before the judge.
Ryle points to John 6:37, where Jesus says, him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. He stresses that no one is accepted on probation.
That is a huge relief.
You are not brought into the house and told, sit in the corner, and if you behave well enough for 6 months, you can stay. If you stumble because you are weak or bad, you are not thrown back out into the cold night.
That removes the crushing anxiety of trying to earn your stay. You are secure, and that security naturally leads into the third room, unvarying kindness.
Christ is not an austere, harsh taskmaster who glares at you every time you make a mistake. He is meek and lowly in heart.
Ryle explains that the Holy Spirit is placed in the believer's heart, dwelling in them as in a temple. The daily provision in this house is leading, guiding, and patient instruction.
Now, I want to clarify something here, because unvarying kindness does not mean there are no rules, or that God just turns a blind eye to destructive behavior.
No, Ryle is clear that discipline absolutely exists in this house.
If we err, we are brought back. If we transgress willfully, we are chastised. But how do we distinguish between punishment and discipline?
A judge punishes a criminal to satisfy the demands of the law. A father disciplines a child to correct their behavior and protect them from harm.
That makes perfect sense.
In this spiritual home, the legal punishment was already absorbed by Christ. Therefore, any correction you receive is the discipline of a devoted parent.
It is meant to heal, not to destroy.
The purpose of the chastisement is to make you better, to strip away the sin that makes you miserable. The rule of the entire house, the very atmosphere of the room, is love.
And this fatherly kindness is sustained by the reality of the fourth room. No change. Ryle quotes Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ the same yesterday and today and forever.
This is the direct, perfect antidote to the first fracture of the world we discussed earlier, the changing world.
Ryle makes a very sharp observation about earthly relationships here. He points out how full of fickleness earthly homes are. Even among friends, there is an exhaustion that sets in.
People offer courtesy and civility on their lips, but inwardly they are weary of your company.
They check their watches, wishing you would leave. You never really know how long your presence is welcome. You are always reading the room.
But with Christ, there is zero fickleness. From your youth to your old age, he is never tired of doing good to those who come to him.
You never have to read the room to see if God is annoyed with you today.
That absolute stability guarantees the final feature of this sanctuary, the fifth room: endless communion.
Once communion is begun with him, it is never broken off. Once joined to the Lord by faith, you are joined for an eternity.
Ryle contrasts this so beautifully with the physical homes we cherish. Earthly homes always come to an end.
The dear old furniture gets sold off at an estate sale. The dear old heads of the family are gathered to their fathers. The nest is pulled to pieces and new tenants move in.
But in Christ, the progression is completely different. We simply move from the lower chamber to the upper chamber.
He uses the imagery of the ancient tabernacle here.
We move from the outer court, where we see things dimly, into the Holy of Holies, the very presence of God. Death is just stepping through the final curtain. Faith is swallowed up in sight.
Let's tie these 5 attributes directly back to the 4 fractures of the physical world. The spiritual architecture perfectly resolves the physical devastation.
The changing world is answered by the room of no change.
The trying world, with its hidden sorrows and skeletons in the closet, is met by his unvarying kindness and gentle discipline.
The dying world, with its empty chairs, is countered by endless communion.
And the dividing world, with its squabbles over China, finds its remedy in the room for all and boundless mercy, where broken, fractured people are justified and united in him.
It is an airtight sanctuary. It addresses every single vulnerability of the human condition.
But simply knowing the supreme safety and warmth of this house is not enough. You can stare at a fortress all day, but if you don't walk inside, you are still exposed to the storm.
There are urgent, practical actions the listener must take in response to this reality.
Ryle closes his chapter with 4 direct warnings and pieces of advice for the pilgrim. The first directive is simple but intensely urgent. Seek the home.
The urgency here is driven by the sheer speed of time. Ryle says time hastens on with giant strides. Old age and death will be upon us before many years have passed.
We are all on a conveyor belt moving in one direction.
To drive this home, he uses the stark imagery of the days of Noah. He warns, "Woe to the man who is found outside the ark when the flood of God's wrath bursts at length on a sinful world."
That is intense language. He is saying the ark is the only place of safety, and Christ is that ark. You must seek him so that you may be safe from the final judgment, yes, but also so that you may have a real right to be cheerful and at ease in this present life.
You cannot truly enjoy your Tuesday if you are terrified of eternity.
That is so true. The peace of the future secures the peace of the present.
Once you have sought the home and entered it, Ryle gives his second directive. Be unashamed. If Christ is the home of your soul, do not be embarrassed by your association with him.
He leans into military imagery here. He says, hoist your flag, show your colors, nail them to the mast so they cannot be taken down. A good soldier is never ashamed of his uniform.
Ryle draws a fascinating contrast regarding what people feel shame over versus what they should feel shame over.
He says people should be deeply ashamed of drinking, gambling, lying, swearing, breaking the Sabbath, idleness, and pride. These are destructive, toxic behaviors.
But strangely, society often flips the script. Society mocks people for Bible reading, praying, and belonging to Christ.
Why do we feel embarrassed to bow our heads and pray at a restaurant? Ryle insists that the believer has no cause to be ashamed. Let the world mock and jest. They will not be scoffing in the hour of death.
Society's mockery is incredibly short-sighted. It is the laughter of people playing cards on a sinking ship while making fun of the person putting on a life vest.
That raises a really practical question. In our modern society, faith is frequently treated as a punchline. Sometimes it is viewed as a genuine social or professional liability.
It definitely can be.
How does fully grasping the security of this home give a person the spine to nail their colors to the mast without getting defensive, angry, or weird when they are mocked?
Defensiveness always arises from a place of insecurity. If you feel your position is fragile, or if your identity is tied up in what people think of you, you will fight aggressively to protect it.
You will argue on the internet, you will get red in the face.
But if you truly understand the architecture of the sanctuary we just described, if you know that your justification is legally secure, that boundless mercy is yours, and that the communion is endless, you do not need to defend the walls of the fortress. The fortress defends you.
Recognizing the absolute security of your spiritual home breeds a quiet, confident gentleness.
You can bear the mockery because you know the mocking cannot penetrate the deep sea suit. You actually start to pity the one mocking you, rather than feeling threatened by them, because you realize they are standing completely exposed outside in the freezing storm.
The security produces the gentleness that is incredibly helpful. Now, directive number 3, do not stray.
Ryle knows human nature. He knows the world, and the flesh will whisper to you.
The temptation is rarely to abandon the faith completely all at once. The whisper suggests that there is no danger in taking a little break from religion, just walking with the world for a short season to see what you are missing.
To counter that whisper, he brings up the sobering example of Lot's wife looking back at Sodom. It is a warning about divided affections.
Your body might be walking towards safety, but your heart is still clinging to the destruction behind you.
Ryle concedes a very realistic point here, which makes him so trustworthy as a guide. He admits there are real pleasures in sin. There is undeniable excitement in the world's ways. If sin were not exciting, it would not be a temptation.
Right, no one is tempted to eat a bowl of gravel. Sin looks like a feast.
But he highlights the aftermath. It is a joy that leaves a bitter taste behind it. It is like drinking salt water to quench your thirst. It feels good for a second, but it accelerates your death.
It is not satisfactory.
The longer you live in the strict paths of wisdom, the more you will realize there truly is no place like home. The warmth of the sanctuary far outweighs the fleeting thrill of the cold outside.
That brings us to the final directive, number 4. Enlist others. If you have found this home, you have a mandate to share the happiness of it. Tell people wherever you are that you have a happy home.
Ryle says to tell them that the master pays far better wages than the world does.
He uses a wonderful invitation from Numbers 10.29, where Moses says to his father-in-law, "Come with us and we will do you good."
That should be the posture of the Christian toward the world. It is not a posture of arrogance or superiority.
It is an invitation to share in the safety and the provision of the sanctuary. It is an act of supreme generosity.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today.
Let's briefly review the progression of this conversation. We started by looking at the fading nature of earthly comforts. We stood with Moses in the wilderness, doing the math on an entire generation passing away, and we stood with the minister at the churchyard gate, confronting our own mortality.
We examine the futility of seeking permanence in a fractured world, a world that is constantly changing your address, trying your patience with hidden skeletons, dying at the Christmas table, and dividing your family over petty squabbles.
And against that bleak backdrop, we saw the unshakable reality of Christ as the soul's true portable sanctuary.
We walk through the 5 rooms, the unbolted doors that welcome the Pharisee and the publican.
The boundless mercy of the golden chain of redemption, the fatherly discipline of unvarying kindness.
The absolute stability of a Savior who never changes, and the endless communion that survives the grave.
The contrast is absolute. The physical world offers temporary lodging at best. The spiritual reality in Christ offers a permanent estate.
Which brings us to a final thought I think we want to leave the listener with.
Yeah, something for you to chew on as you go about your week. Early in the text, Ryle refers to the world as an inn. Think about what an inn is. It is a rented room by the side of the highway.
You sleep there for a night, maybe 2, while you're traveling somewhere else.
You don't own the bed, you don't own the walls, and you have to check out by 11:00 a.m. Now look at your own daily schedule. Look at your bank statements. Look at where the vast majority of your mental energy goes when your head hits the pillow.
If you truly believe the physical world is just a temporary inn, how much of your limited time and energy are you wasting trying to furiously redecorate a rented room instead of preparing for the permanent estate?
Let that question linger.